Welcome starts with e4. The move d6 initiates the Pirc Defense. This is a modern opening where we allow white to dominate the center temporarily, planning to launch a counterattack later using our minor pieces. Next, you can play knight to f6, directly challenging the central pawn. White will likely defend it with a move like knight to c3. However, if white pushes e5, they immediately run into trouble. After exchanges in the center, we can trade queens and follow up with knight to g4. This move threatens to capture the rook, forcing white to protect the f2 square, ultimately leaving them down a pawn. Advancing in this way is not ideal for white, which is why knight to c3 remains the most common response. Here, I want to present you with two options. Choose whichever suits your style. Both will lead to a solid middle game without getting tangled in the opening. The first option follows the main line, where you play g6, fianchetto your bishop, and castle kingside. I'll cover this in detail later in the video. But first, let's explore an interesting alternative, starting with c6, known as the Czech defense. The purpose of this move is to prevent white's knight from advancing into our territory, prepare queenside expansion, and most importantly, open up the diagonal for our queen. I understand that some of you might hesitate to bring out your queen this early, which is why I also suggested g6 as an alternative. However, trust me, this is a strong variation worth trying, especially since many white players are unprepared for it and can easily make mistakes. Now let's go over black's strategy. Suppose white plays knight to f3. You then develop your queen along this diagonal. Typically, we avoid early queen development because it can be chased away, giving the opponent extra tempo. But in this position, if you analyze it carefully, white doesn't have many immediate threats against our queen, except for b4, which we can simply capture. Bringing the queen to a5 is completely fine. The knight is now pinned. If white isn't careful and plays a natural move like bishop to e2 or bishop to c4, preparing to castle kingside, that would be a mistake because we can simply capture this pawn for free since the knight is stuck. So in this position, white must address the pawn. If they defend it with bishop to d3, your plan should be to break open the center. The key move here is pawn to e5. If white captures, we take back, and our pawn stays protected by the queen. This setup is solid for black. We gain space in the center, and white's knight is restricted, unable to jump forward due to our pawn structure. All right, let's go back. If at any point you feel that your queen is under threat, for example, if white plays bishop to d2, setting up a discovered attack, you'll need to reposition it. Just remember, c7 is your go-to square. This keeps your queen safe while maintaining control over the e5 square, so always keep that in mind. Now, in this position, after playing e5, if white doesn't capture and instead goes for a move like short castle, there's no need to take the pawn immediately. Instead, stay patient and continue with natural development. First bishop to e7, then castle kingside. You can also play h6 to prevent any piece from jumping into g5. Once your kingside setup is complete, your next plan is to expand on the queenside. This knight will typically move out from here, while the bishop can be developed to b7 or e6. Both rooks will then take control of the center. That's the general strategy for black in this setup. But what about white? What's the best way to counter the Czech defense? And how should black respond if they opt for g6 on move 4? Let's quickly recap the Czech defense. As black, you begin with d6, followed by knight to f6, then c6, and develop your queen to a5. If white tries to attack your queen, simply retreat to c7. Your next key plan is to push e5 to challenge the center, develop your bishop, and castle kingside. This approach helps you reach a strong and stable middle game position effortlessly. If you're playing as white and your opponent responds with c6, the best move I recommend is pawn to f4. Many players hesitate to play this because they feel it weakens their king's position, so they don't even consider it. However, I actually like this move because it strengthens white's control over the center. Just look at how solid this structure is. Plus, black doesn't have many immediate threats against the white king, so it's not as risky as it seems. If needed, you can also play h3 to prevent black's knight or bishop from jumping in. Now, after queen to a5, you go bishop to d3 to defend the central pawn. Then, when black plays e5, you develop your knight to f3, placing it behind the pawn. Thanks to f4, you now have an extra attacker on e5, which makes a significant difference in the position. Black cannot simply maintain the tension. He must either capture immediately or address the e5 pawn. Otherwise, white can simply take and gain a free pawn. Capturing on f4 would allow white to develop the dark squared bishop effortlessly, so taking on d4 is the better option. White can then recapture with the knight, and if you look at the position, white appears comfortable, especially with strong central control. Now going back, if black chooses not to capture right away, he can instead play bishop to g4, pinning the knight, and follow up with knight to d7 to add another defender. In such a setup, white can play bishop to e3 to reinforce the center and then castle kingside. Even if white handles the position perfectly, the game remains balanced, and black still has solid chances in this opening. That concludes our look at the Czech defense. Now, let's explore the main line of the Pirc defense. e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, and instead of c6, we go for g6. While there are different move orders, they all lead to this key position. As black, your strategy is straightforward. Fianchetto your bishop, castle kingside, secure your king, break open the center, and attack on the queen side. This setup remains consistent across variations, making it easier to play. In contrast, white must prepare for multiple responses, which is one reason I like this opening for black. From this position, white has four main options. The most common is the classical setup, where white plays knight to f3, leading to natural development for both sides. After the standard moves, white may choose to expand on the queen side with a 4, eventually pushing a 5 to restrict black's space. Another common idea is to develop the dark squared bishop to e3, followed by queen to d2, and then aiming for bishop to h6 to exchange black's strong fianchettoed bishop. If black exchanges, white can recapture with the queen, weakening black's dark squares. These are some of white's key strategies. Now as black, your focus should be on activating your bishop, possibly even exchanging it for white's knight. The best square for the bishop is g4, as other spots along the diagonal are easily attacked. For the rest of your pieces, you can develop the knight along this route and place your queen on c7. To stop white's a4 a5 expansion, a strong move is a 5. This also allows you to maneuver your knight to a 6, then b4, where it becomes highly active. I won't go too deep into variations to keep things simple, but I hope this gives you a clear understanding of the main plans for both white and black. Alright, after looking at the classical variation, let's move on to white's second option, the Austrian attack, which begins with f4. This is white's most aggressive approach. The idea is to develop the knight behind the f-pawn, similar to what we saw in the Czech variation, and then push a 5 to launch a kingside attack. White can also develop the light-squared bishop to d3, followed by e5, opening up the diagonal toward black's king while attacking the knight. This setup looks strong, as e5 is well supported by both pawns and the knight. In this variation, e5 is white's key move, so always keep it in mind. To intensify the attack, white may also advance the kingside pawns and castle queenside, setting up a powerful offensive. White can set up a plan with h3, g4, bishop to d3, and then advance with f5. In the Austrian attack, black has limited space due to white's strong central pawn structure. To counter this, black should challenge white's control by playing c5 or even knight to c6, followed by e5. Trading in the center would allow black to gain space and create counterplay with minor pieces. There's also an interesting idea where, after e5, black can sacrifice a knight to immediately gain a pawn advantage and completely disrupt white's central control. That wraps up our overview of the Pirc defense. Whether you play it as white or black, understanding these key ideas will help you navigate the opening with confidence. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more chess content. Thanks for watching.